As a millennial, I think it is my legal obligation to wish you all a happy fall, even though it is very much still summer. It is hot and sweaty. I did not always like fall very much, actually, but now that I am in my 30s and I no longer associate this time of year with the trauma of starting a new school year, I enjoy fall quite a lot more. Currently, I am getting ready for a couple of Halloween/fall markets, namely the Tour de Corgi in Fort Collins. The important info you need to know about the Tour de Corgi is that there is a parade of corgis in Halloween costumes, and it is a wonderful time. It is so charming and good and sweet. For the Tour de Corgi, I have made a beer garden and corgi themed design that I'm very happy about. I am going to be getting it screen printed on t-shirts for the market. I wanted to break down the time lapse with y'all and kind of go through everything step by step because it's a little bit different to prep artwork files knowing that they are going to be screen printed and to have the knowledge of how things will look as halftones and that kind of thing. So let's get into it. So what we're looking at right now is what the final artwork ended up being. Ideally, what you want to end up going for with screen printing is you end up having all of one color as a single layer. So for example, I knew I wanted a dark green shirt, so I did two different screens. I have this orange screen and then a white screen. And you can see, especially with the white, the differences in the opacity layers. Despite having different opacity values, once everything comes together, you only have the single colors per screen, if that makes sense. Let's go ahead and start with my initial concepts because these are funny. These are the initial thumbnails that I knew that I wanted to do. I had wanted to do another isometric design similar to the ramen dog artwork I had done. And I had done a bunch of research looking at what beer gardens typically look like and the aesthetics and sort of color schemes and that kind of thing. I knew I wanted it to have a big tree in the center with a bar kind of built in surrounding it, and then like a little corgi barkeep and different little corgis coming in to get their beers and their pretzels. So that was my initial thumbnails. And then from there, I was able to go through and actually build out more references. So I knew I wanted the corgis to be sitting up. I knew I wanted them to be wearing the lederhosen. I had found lots of images of beer gardens outside with trees and lights and lots of greenery and banners and things like that. My initial sketch of the design, let's get that brightened up. So I took just one of my thumbnails that I liked the most and used that as the base to start doing refined sketch layers. I tend to work in multiple stages of sketching because I just don't sketch very cleanly. I never really have. And being able to try different things and build things up until I eventually got a sketch that I knew I was happy with just made my process a lot easier to follow. My focus for doing the different layers of sketching was I wanted to really nail down the composition because my ramen dog's shirt, the composition was a lot easier for me because I was really relying on the isometric perspective for everything, for the building, for the food, for the dogs, for the chairs, everything. Whereas this, I couldn't really rely on that for the tree, which was as much of a focal point as the corgis themselves. So I wanted to figure out exactly what this shape of the outline of the tree would look like. And it took a few iterations to get there. I also had originally included these different lights and banners and streamers because you can see them throughout a lot of different reference images as well. I ended up not including them in the final design. Everything just looked way too cluttered with everything. So from there, I started inking. Oh no, I didn't even start inking. I did another sketch on top of the red one here. So not even a final sketch. How many sketches did I do? So let's see. 1 thumbnail, 2 sketch, 3 sketch, 4 sketch. So yeah, it took me 4 layers of sketching to get to a point that I felt like I could ink it. I just work with a lot of sketchy layers. I don't work very cleanly when I'm initially figuring out my ideas. I think a lot of it is I am using my sketching process as a way to actively brainstorm. I am making decisions as I am making new sketch layers. It takes me multiple layers of sketching to flesh out ideas and break everything down into the ideal steps that I want. Okay, so now we have the finalized sketch layer. From here, I went ahead and started inking, so we'll get into that. But I wanted to talk about the colors you see here as well, these guys here. I knew that I wanted the base of the shirt to be a dark green. I knew I wanted a dark green shirt because the way screen printing and halftones work is you very much have a very limited number of colors to work with because it can get really expensive. It can get really complicated depending on how many screens are in a design. I've been trying to keep my screen printing designs to just 2 screens. What has been working for me is to have a white, have a main color, and then whatever the shirt color is acts as what a line art color would be for things. So the green I knew would end up being the color of all of the line art. And then I could go through with the white and sort of the orangish gold color to figure out all my different colors and things like that. So let's go into inking. I did not ink everything on a single layer. So this is the sketch layer I had finalized. I went in and enabled the drawing guide so that I could use the isometric perspective. You can have the drawing assist enabled, which is super helpful for doing straight lines and perspective and that kind of thing. I use that for anything with straight lines, so the bar top, the stools, the benches, that kind of thing. You can also use it for anything in the perspective really, but something that had helped me with the barrels, for example, was if you wanted to draw a box in perspective like that as a sketch, then you could utilize that box to make your non-square objects fit into perspective more easily and more accurately. The reason I do all of these line art steps as separate layers is for a few reasons. Namely, with elements like the corgis, for example, the individual corgis, they are all identical with a few minor changes in between here and there. But I wanted to make them identical to make it easier on myself, so I only would have to draw one thing essentially. So I basically drew one of the corgis and then would copy and paste it to fit in the different positions and areas that I needed them in. I did that with the barrels, I did that with the mugs. It's a perk of doing work digitally. So I don't have the bar keep on here, but I'll show you what I did for that. So this is a version of the line art that's a little bit more cleaned up. So there are fewer layers because I had started to merge things. So you can see all of those front corgis are on one layer. The mugs are a single layer. The tree is getting broken down into a single layer, that kind of thing. I'd really wanted to do the pretzels hanging in the trees here. I loved this reference image specifically of having the pretzels hanging up, and I thought it would just feel very cute and whimsical for the corgis to have them hanging off the branches to eat. So that was something I really wanted to incorporate. So I basically just ended up drawing one pretzel and then copying and pasting it as many times as I needed, going through and altering the line art where I needed to in order to make them fit so they actually look like they're sitting on the branches like that. So this is the final line art file. I ended up doing a simplified version of this beer garden text for the sign because I really liked how it looked being on the wood slab like that. I wanted to make sure that it had more simplified ornamentation so that it would read more easily from far away, because even though these are printed as t-shirts and they're about, a foot across and maybe 14 to 18 inches tall on a torso, little details like this can get lost really easily. So one of the steps I also ended up going through and doing with the line art is essentially just blocking out certain areas into shadow rather than trying to fit little itty bitty tiny dots of color in, just because when you zoom out far enough, that kind of detail just gets lost and it can end up looking really muddy and messy. This is the line art plus a selection of the interior of the line art to act as a base for a clipping mask. In order to create the base for the clipping mask, you select the outside of your line art and then you invert it, and then you go down to a layer below that you end up filling with your color of choice that you can then enable this clipping mask on. So once you enable it, then everything will fall into the boundaries you had set. From there, I basically go through and start dragging and dropping colors. I have my line art set to the reference layer so that when I drag and drop colors on different layers, they will be within the bounds of the line art as well as the bounds of the clipping mask. You'll also notice here, I have my layers labeled things like orange 30, orange 60, orange 100. These are notes for myself for the different opacity layers. So the printer that I go to for my shirts basically recommended to me to not go below 20% opacity on any of my layers. So the lowest I'm doing is 30%. You can see here. With screen printing, because you have a limited number of colors, basically having different opacities and having different layers of colors is what will end up being your friend for you. I basically went through and made kind of like a swatch palette with the different colors I'd picked out, the green, the white, and the orange, so that I could have an idea of what types of colors I can mix by just altering the opacity levels on things. What I end up doing is I go through and I basically fill in everything that I know is going to be a specific color. So everything that is going to be the orange is what I fill in. And then I go through and tweak and alter the opacity on certain things to figure out exactly how saturated I want something to be. You can also do this by mixing colors. So because I'm doing two different screens, I have a few different areas where the white will overlay either just the green or the green and the white, and those create different colors and different effects. I think for the most part, on this design specifically, I only really have stuff overlapping the green. I don't have a lot of it overlapping the orange and white. So my goal is basically to map out everywhere I want the orange, for example, or everywhere that I want the white, for example. And once I figure that out, I can then go in and tweak the levels for the opacity and figure out the colors I want to mix and that kind of thing. The next step after doing just the base colors and figuring out levels of opacity I want, I can go through and tweak the line art as well, because eventually the line art is going to be gone. It's going to look a little bit more like that because, again, you're only using the two screens, so what your line art is will actually end up being the shirt color. That's what I have been doing for my own designs, and that's been helpful for me. So for example, the beer garden sign, I wanted to have some white to it, even though eventually it will not have the lines underneath it. And I also did that with the shine on the beer glasses as well. I did a little reflection like that. This is where I got after doing all of the base colors with the different layers. I ended up breaking everything down into 100% opacity, 60% opacity, and 30% opacity for the white and then the orange respectively. And you can see here, I have a few different orange 30 layers because I was mixing and matching and trying to figure out what versions of things I liked. It's a very useful tool to be able to just duplicate layers and move things around and figure out what color schemes you like and that kind of thing. I had a lot of different versions I tried on the tree, as you can see here, but I ended up liking having this orange and white mixture. I think that's what I ended up going with, I'm pretty sure. Once everything gets cleaned up from the line art, I think it looks really, really slick. I did two different versions of the shirt because I wasn't sure how effective a couple of them would be for printing. So my original design, which is this one. On the original design here, I did a gradient in the center to have this shadow to make the bartender stand out a little bit more from the tree here because this line was getting kind of muddy. The other version is a solid version, so there's no gradient in the middle here. And this guy ends up getting a little bit muddy because he blends in a little bit too well with the tree color because their lederhosen and the tree ended up being the same opacity. So you can see in here, it's harder to read what's going on. So we were able to end up going with the gradient version, which I like much, much more. Yeah, I'm excited to see how it turns out. Let's go through the actual time lapse here. So you can see how I start with the thumbnail and then went ahead and did that isometric perspective and just continued to block in the thumbnail. Yeah, my process with sketching and doing different layers of sketches is interesting because I initially start out doing these very big blocky swatches of color to figure out the overall shape and composition that I want everything to have. You saw me do that with the outline of the leaves of the tree especially. Once I am able to get that down, then I can start thinking about the details of where the corgis are and like their little mugs of beer and their little snacks and their pretzels, and I wanted the tap to be a dog bone and little cutesy details like that. I wish I could have incorporated the lights in the tree somehow. I really like them as an idea, but it just got way too cluttered too quickly, and I was worried it would make the screens a little bit too complicated for what I was wanting to do. Then I go in and draw a singular barrel nicely, and then I can just copy and paste it and alter things as much as I need to, and it's so much more effective for me than trying to redraw the same thing over and over again. I also do that with the corgi here as well. I figured out exactly what the pose was that I wanted, and then I could alter them a little bit. One of them has his tongue sticking out, and then I use the same corgi base for the bartender, even though it's in a different position, just so that I could get the proportions the same for all of them. Once I get all of the different line art layers figured out, I was able to go through and start merging everything so that things could be cohesive and I could really block out exactly what needed to be overlapping where and the differences of the weight of the line art. Wonderful. And then here we get into the coloring. This is what I'm excited about. So I first went through and I was merging all of the different line art layers to figure out where everything needed to be exactly. And I make that base layer by filling in the interior of all of the line art space so that I can do a clipping mask on top of it, and it just allows me to work really quickly because you can just drag and drop colors and do everything on separate layers, and it's very easy to keep everything organized and not let stuff get mixed up together. But a lot of this is just filling in the different chunks of line art and figuring out where I want what levels of opacity to be. It's an interesting process because, as you can see, I only have 2 colors I'm really working with, 3 if you count the shirt, and it's an interesting process to figure out how to make everything readable with a limited palette, which is something I'm still working on personally. I'm still learning about how color theory works and how to make things readable and come across as legible even if your colors aren't especially accurate. Stuff like local color is something that's super interesting to me that I don't know a lot about, and I am still learning about. Having knowledge like that can really come in handy when you are doing design work specific to something like screen printing, where you have restrictions and limited tools and limited colors at your disposal. I wanted to do a little bit of design work on their lederhosen. I couldn't make it especially detailed because they're so tiny and far away, but it definitely needed like a little bit of something to make them read. I really wanted to have this very strong outline of the tree, this shape of the tree, but I only had, again, so many colors I could use so much without it reading too cluttered, because I didn't want it to be the focal point. I wanted the corgis to be the focus of the piece. I ended up going through and doing a little bit of an outline that you can see with that wider shade so that the tree would stand out just a little bit more against the green, and I really like how it turned out. I think it still reads really well. I don't think it's too distracting or anything. So going back into the Procreate file, you can see the final version with the 2 separate layers broken down. There we go. And that is the final piece, which I have been calling the Corgtoberfest shirt. I will have my Corgtoberfest shirts available at my booth at the Tour de Corgi in Fort Collins on October 4th. If you are unable to make it in person to the Tour de Corgi, I also am doing a pre-order for the shirts through my Etsy shop, and the link will be in the description below. If you would like to subscribe, please feel free. I am uploading every other Friday, and any engagement you leave on the video also helps me out very much, including comments, likes, shares, all that good stuff goes to feed the great algorithm beast that looms over us all, and it helps me out as well, so thank you. That's it. That's all I got. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.